Hi, Timothy. I think you could even say that a troop of monkeys or other group of animals can prosper. Can you not? My point is, obviously, you can say technology enables prosperity to a huge degree, but I think it's a step too far to say that it equals prosperity or is upstream of all prosperity, given our most fundamental needs actually come from the earth. Our food, our water, our ability to have shelter, our society with each other, our community are all not about technology. So let's not get too crazy with our worship.
Sure, the earth does provide us with all those things. So I agree there. With that being said, though, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is resources. And with the right technologies, we can extract resources anywhere in the universe without earth, versus the inverse is not true. If we had earth but no technologies, we would not be so prosperous. We would still be stuck in the caveman days fighting over the leftover deer carcass. I wanted to share another point that's pretty adjacent to the main topic of the group, which is most people believe that the problems that we currently have today are due to a lack of funding, that money is this finite thing in the world and it's being hogged by a small number of people who are not willing to share that wealth and use it to solve our problems. But that's not really how it works. Usually when you just throw money at a problem like the government does, it just ends up being a much more expensive problem and it doesn't get solved. If anything, it gets a lot worse. The real solution is really innovation to make these scarce resources much more abundant and accessible.
Related to that, people think that money is like this thing that if it's not used, it sits idle and it's being wasted by these stupid capitalists, but that's not really what happens. In reality, if you're not using money, it actually still gets spent because it is a pointer to underlying resources which still get used. And I talk about it in the chit that I've linked to here. That is a complete fallacy of how capital works. If capital is not being spent, let's say you have an heir who doesn't know what to do with it, if they don't spend it and they put it in the bank, well, it gets reinvested. Savings equals investment. That is a fundamental theorem of basic economics. That's number one. Number two, if they're not spending it and assume that they're not even doing any investment with it, they just stuff it in gold or stuff it in a mattress, then what happens is everybody else's money becomes more valuable because that money is essentially out of circulation. So you just reduce the denominator. So again, there's no such thing as wasted. Hoarding money doesn't do anything because all real productivity doesn't come from money. It comes from working assets and businesses. So they aren't stopping other businesses and assets from working, which is exactly what people seizing money and what the government does. So the harm comes from the people seizing the money, not from the people who are not spending this fake thing called money anyway. Finally, if they're spending it on yachts and cigars and things that you don't approve of, well, Jeff Bezos can do the same thing and you don't seem to have a problem with it. The government does far worse, spending it on bombs and missiles and on stupid government wastage programs and bureaucracies. But I don't hear people complaining about that. So this whole idea that people who didn't make the money don't know how to spend it properly and that somehow the government will spend it more efficiently is complete nonsense.
I really like this point. My favorite example of it is comparing the cost of launch from a rocket from NASA versus SpaceX. There might be some problems in this comparison, and I just randomly Googled numbers, but apparently the space shuttle launch was 1.6 billion and the current Falcon 9 launch is 62 million. And so it's obviously a huge difference. And the reason is because of technological innovation. That's pretty much the only reason. But to ask a more interesting question, the reason they had to innovate was because they didn't have the resources to kind of take the easy way out and throw money at a problem. They were put against a wall. The only way they could succeed to make this rocket company was to make cheap, reusable rockets. And so most of the times I've seen that true progress happens when humanity is pushed into a corner and has to make results happen or else they won't succeed. I wonder if there are sustainable ways that we can continue to innovate without being put in that uncomfortable position, but maybe that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I agree. Usually when there's an abundance, you take a shortcut and just abuse your resources versus when there's scarcity, you have to make do with what you have. You see this with startups when they get overly funded, they just spend money like crazy, wash it down the drain, do all kind of silly things with it versus when there's a small amount of funding or if it's bootstrapped altogether, they make every dollar count. They stretch it as far as possible. And because of that, you do get a bigger bang for your buck. You do get more efficiencies with your dollars. Ultimately, I think it's a really good thing because at the end of the day, you want to be able to do more and more with less and less. That's the goal of innovation. And that ultimately, I think it's a really good thing because at the end of the day, you want to be able to do more and more with less and less. That's the goal of innovation. And that's how these things become much more accessible to everyone.
I think this is extremely important. It doesn't surprise me that there's a hyperfixation on money and who has it, because most would salivate at the idea of a free million popping up in the bank account. And to see other people living that reality seems frustrating and unfair, and it is. But that's just not a progressive way to live your life. My favorite thing you said is that the real productivity in the economy comes from real working assets and businesses creating value for society. And I think that Americans should spend more time being grateful to live in a capitalistic and free society that allows them to create new things and get some outputs from their inputs. I think more people should be talking like that. Plus, I think it's going to be a more gratifying life to actually create some things to help the human race than to just be a trust fund baby. But I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think humans are just hardwired to be pessimistic and ungrateful. There's good and bad to it. The good is that we're never satisfied, so that we strive for more, and it requires to innovate to obtain more. The bad side is that you have someone who lives in shelter with air conditioning, running electricity, sanitized water, high-speed internet, and will tell you that, 2020 or 2023 is the worst year of all of human history or something like that, the worst year ever. So I guess you take what you can.
So every good invention, good explanation that creates abundance also has the countervailing effect of creating more gravity or around the status quo, because more people are satisfied, more people have less problems, their backs are not up against the wall, and they are fat and happy. And that's really problematic, right? Because then people, those people on the margin will fail to innovate, or they'll start looking at innovation as a disturbance of something of the status quo that already works, rather than what got us here in the first place. Yes, I agree. Technology helped us go from hunter and gathering, where calories were scarce. You had to work for them. You had to chase down the animal. You had to pick the berries. And now we have so much food all around us. Just in the past 3 generations, after 10,000 generations of struggling to find it, that it's created a gigantic problem where now prosperity is managing not to eat as much as your algorithm desires based on the food around you. Don't follow your algorithm's urges and control them. So yes, we have to redefine prosperity. And I think I said in a previous chit, technological innovation gives rise to moral innovation, which gives rise to technological innovation, and it's a spiral up and out. And I think of Maslow's ladder should really be redefined as a spiral, because the more you go up, the bigger an impact you can have, and the bigger your view of everything around you, which makes you more moral, more empathetic, etc.
Related to this, people talk about the brilliance of certain physicists, that they have this facility for understanding the physical world. Extend that to the most brilliant musicians that have ever lived. They seem to understand rhythm and tone and musicality better than the average person. Where am I going with any of this? I think making money is the same kind of thing. There's a kind of inexplicit knowledge there. If the physicists could really tell you how to make advances in physics in the way that they do, then everyone could be a brilliant physicist, because they'd just be teaching courses on what it is they do, but they can't quite explain it. They intuit their way to it. The same as the great musicians do that as well. They can't, it's not teachable, not because it's impossible, but because they just don't know how yet. None of us know how yet to do what they do. We only know scant bits of evidence about how they do what they do. Talent and skill is just a certain kind of knowledge. When it comes to sport, I'll grant that there's a lot of genetics involved there because it's using your body. And so the body is, made up of, it can be explained almost purely in terms of genetics. But someone like Roger Federer, one of the greatest tennis players of all time, yeah, okay, so we can talk about 50-50 genetics there, and the other 50% is talent, which has to be learned. So sport's a special case. But when it comes to physics and intellectual pursuits, especially physics, that's something I kind of know about, and I've studied the great physicists and what they say, almost to a person. They never claim to be brighter, the really excellent ones over time. Einstein, Feynman, Deutsch, they never say, I'm smarter than the average person. What they say is they are doggedly determined to find the answer to the problem. They're passionately curious about a particular thing. That's all. That's what makes the difference. And I would say the same is true, and I will defer to, Naval's expertise on this, but I would say the same is true of the great investors and the great technologists. They're just doggedly determined to work on this one particular thing to figure out the solution to the problem of where to put the investment, of who's a reliable collaborator, of what technology seems promising. They figure this stuff out. They've got inexplicit knowledge they can't quite explain to anyone else, but they have a feel for it in the same way that the great physicists end up developing a feel for what works, an intuition. It's a learned thing that isn't easily explainable to anyone else. They can't communicate it, but it's there, it's real. Which brings me to the government. This is a group of people who have actively, by and large, avoided making money their entire lives. They're not good at anything except telling other people what to do. Now, there are exceptions. Say what you like about him. Trump knows something about making money. There's been a few people in politics over time who are really good at making money, or at least, give them a small amount of money, they can make more out of it. Yeah, I know, you bring up Trump and, the conversation falls away and people will say, oh no, he got all his money from his father and he was a terrible business person. You hear people like Sam Harris talk this way all the time. Okay, who cares about that? There are examples you can find in politics of people making a lot of money, but I don't think that, in fact, is a good criteria actually for being a politician. There are other things at work there, but what I would say is that politicians are not necessarily, by and large, good with money. So you give them a huge amount of money, and it's kind of like that old thing about an airline. How do you make a small amount of money? Well, start an airline with a large amount of money, and you'll end up with a small amount of money. So with the government, take a large amount of money, and how do you make a tiny, tiny little bit of money? Well, give it to the government. In fact, not only won't they make any money, they'll lose it all. They just give up on projects. They start a huge rail project or infrastructure project, and then they just give up halfway through. And so it's still just being completely wasted. These people are not good with money, and they go into government because, hey, they couldn't succeed in business or science or anywhere else, by and large. So, yeah, let's not turn to them with where extra money should be put. If you've got profit, leave it with the business people because they know what to do with it. They're the experts. They're the ones who can turn a small amount of money into a large amount of money. And that's what we want if we want to increase wealth. And of course we do, because everyone's boat rises with that tide.
Hey, Brett, first of all, I just wanted to say that beginning explanation you gave with the musicians and the great physicists really conceptualized this idea of specific knowledge in a way that clicked really solid to me for some reason. So I appreciate that a lot. And it's kind of like, makes complete sense that these musicians who are spending so much time playing with their instrument in the world of the sounds, or the physicists who are just being creatively playing around with an idea in their head for hours and hours that you can't see, it's happening behind the scenes. There's no way that you could articulate this and teach it to somebody. And this makes a lot of sense now. So I'm basically just regurgitating podcasts at this point, but to me, it seems like the government has this huge case with the principal agent problem, because it doesn't really matter how well you perform. You just throw money at a problem and more funding will come in a year later anyway. Whereas with these private sector industries, you have this enormous incentive to perform and optimize because your survival is at stake. And the difference in results in terms of technological innovation, which is tying back to what this room is about, I think that's really an important part of the discussion.
I think this is absolutely true. I was obsessed with businesses from a very young age. I think this is absolutely true. I was obsessed with businesses from a very young age. I would start mentally taking apart the pizza parlor and arcade business when I was in there as a 9-year-old kid, and I would talk about it with my mom. And I was obsessed with science and technology at an age shortly after that. So very interesting. Yes, I would say at least for me, everything I'm good at, I was passionate about since I was a kid. And it was just entertaining to me to constantly turn it over in my head, nonstop. So I think for the great physicists, the great musicians, it's very similar. They acquire specific knowledge and talent just through an obsession at an early age. In fact, I think there's no surer route to success long term, maybe not financial success, but all kinds of success, than to pursue your intellectual obsessions.
Another way of saying this is that success breeds complacency. In other words, it's just another reason why practice is better than theory. If innovation is about doing more and more with less and less, then the government is basically anti-innovation because all they seem to do is less and less with more and more.
It's so interesting that you mentioned the fields that you mentioned: physics, math, sports, music. Those are all based on essentially truth, the interaction of the individual with nature or physical reality. But making money is different. Why? Because the money itself is kind of fraudulent, especially because it constantly is debased. And the people that are closest to the money, whether those are the friends of the central bankers or the friends of the commercial bankers, et cetera, they get early access to the currency as it's being debased. So I would push back on the idea that the same kind of innate native talent is what helps people make money. I think building businesses might be slightly different because that requires problem solving, which does require rubbing yourself up against the real world. But making money, there's so many wealthy people that clearly don't have a great amount of talent except their ability to be political or their ability to work their way up to the right spot in the hierarchy to have access to the money. I thought that was an interesting difference. The politicians are really good at making money. They're just not really good at making money by creating value. I mean, look at Nancy Pelosi. What an amazing stock trader. Or look at the wealth of any senator before they enter the Senate and then afterwards. Somehow, even though they're getting paid a fixed salary, they're making a lot of money when they get out. So Trump is interesting because he was out in the real world, hustling and bustling and trying to make money with real estate. And sure, he had lots of advantages, and maybe you don't like his vulgarity, but he is categorically different. And Vivek is also categorically different as a candidate. So it's interesting. And hopefully that is a harbinger for change of government people that are business people. That would be great. In Mexico, there's a funny expression that says un político pobre es un pobre político, which translates as a poor politician is a poor politician. Does it breed complacency in everybody, or does it represent fuel for people, for certain people, that they get some success and that validates them and they can go for more success? But it does seem that the fruits of success, not in individuals, but the achievements that then create consumer surplus and abundance, do inspire complacency in the people that are not motivated to seek and do the work of finding that kind of success, that hard work in the first place. It's even worse than that because they tax, they take the resources, they issue debt, and then they debase the currency. It's like a triple whammy. they're terrible with money.
Yeah, I do agree with what you're saying for sure. When life is so good, when you just sit at home, eat potato chips and watch Netflix, there really is no incentive to go out there and build things and contribute to the world and innovate. With that being said, to my point that success breeds complacency, I would argue on the individual level that the people who are just as hungry as they were prior to success, like an Elon Musk, I would think that they don't really consider themselves successful because they don't measure themselves in terms of financial success. You know, Elon wants to get to Mars. He wants to be a multi-planet species. And in that regard, he is not yet successful.
Yeah, maybe ambition is a genetic condition.
Yeah, this is related to another chit I had in a different room. Tried to stitch it here, but it didn't work. But I think humans are just hardwired to be unsatisfied. Some people are miserable because of it, and others use it as fuel to keep pushing forward. So I wanted to play devil's advocate against myself and steelman the other side. Yes, technology does enable prosperity, but you know, at the end of the day, technologies are tools, and tools can be used for bad and evil. So once these tools are more accessible to everyone, especially these very powerful tools, what's stopping someone from, you know, equivalently nuking, hundreds, thousands, millions of people, or releasing a genetically modified virus out in the world they made in their mom's basement, or just some crazy equivalent like that that can have huge asymmetrical downside for humanity, or at least large populations of people. So I do see something like that as a big potential blow up risk. The only defense that I can think of is that if humans, as long as they don't go extinct, they can adapt and learn to prevent or react to those situations properly.
Thanks for bringing up this relevant concern, because the cavemen would literally say that we are living in this reality. A 3D printed firearm is the equivalent of a democratic access to a point-and-click death machine, and we've seen the negative consequences of reckless individuals with that power in their hands. As for practical solutions, I mean, this is one of the hardest problems I think that ever came up, but I just believe in human ingenuity. We will figure it out.
Technology defined as thing made by human to solve problem that humans have, and prosperity meaning humans with fewer problems than they had before thanks to technology. Technology can be used to create problems, and often is. And why is that? The individuals create the technology, but then the collectivist misuses the technology. The bombs that are dropped by governments. The innovation of understanding the power at the heart of, unleashing the power at the heart of an atom is an individual or a group of individuals who create. Do individuals sometimes misuse the technology that is created? The mass shootings was the reference Matt gave. Yes, but the idea of somebody CRISPRing up a gain-of-function virus in their basement is possible and probably will eventually happen, just like possibly somebody will eventually have a suitcase bomb and set it off, a nuclear bomb. But doesn't it seem that history shows that it's the collectivists that misuse the technology way more than any individuals ever do? The casualties of war between nations surely vastly outnumber the casualties of individual murderers, even mass murderers. The other problem that arises is that the group, the collective, the people in power, that could be a king that, takes up the water source and makes his castle there, and he controls who gets irrigated. It could be the government that just takes power and then takes more and more power. The problem there is that as they gain control of the economic output of the individuals, they can start funding their own technological research and innovation by those individuals and paying them to do it. And those have become the good jobs that exist for people that want to create new technology. So the collectivists start being able to produce technology as well, and they continue to abuse it, not only in the form of violence against others, but also in the form of control over the people, including the people that are productive in making these good new inventions. So getting back to the name of the room, part of the new problems that technology needs to solve is how do you empower the individuals more against that collectivist action, which tends to abuse the technology that individuals create? And how do you reduce the power that the collectivists have so that they're not the source of all the good new inventions? They're not controlling those opportunities and therefore attracting all the best creative people. How do you do that? That's a big problem, because without solving that problem, you have a diminishment of prosperity, because we all have a big problem. It's called the government, or abuse of power, or fiat money that's debased. And we need to solve those problems. And like an example of somebody who invented a solution to the problem is Satoshi Nakamoto and Bitcoin. And I think it's awesome. And I think we need to encourage many more people to invent stuff that solves the problem of concentration of power and returns power to the individual.
Parsa, thanks for going there, because at least what I hear is that this sounds like the pendulum going between centralization and decentralization, which is a cyclical process that happens along human civilization history, where a lot of progress happens when one crosses to the other. And so I don't even know if this is something to be solved. I mean, we as a current generation right now, 2023, we have these problems with large entities trying to control the media we consume and the food we consume and the substances we consume. And that's a huge problem. And we will solve it by using decentralized solutions. But maybe given another 500 years, humans will be like, wait a second, this is a very unstable world that could be solved by a centralized, authority. And maybe given another 1,000 years, they will have their own unique set of problems to deal with that. So
I would say the government is not good at telling other people what to do either. The government outsources creativity and has others tell them what their structure should look like and what their strategy should be and how they should execute that strategy.
The ultimate steelman of technology equals prosperity could be in the context of AI. I created this room called AI Doomer versus AI Zoomer to discuss whether AI and the potential of artificial superintelligence is something that will continue to lead to greater prosperity or will lead to our extinction. If anyone's interested in joining and sharing their insights and views, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I also just realized that you can paste, if you choose the text option, you paste a link to a room or a chit, you can then comment over it. I didn't realize that before.